Hello, everyone. Welcome to Book Carnival. We're in Orange, California, and tonight we're having the pleasure of I'm letting someone else in, the pleasure of meeting with Mariana Evans and Jess Montgomery, two authors that I've read and enjoyed thoroughly. Their books are fascinating, and they're going to tell us all about the latest ones. But I'm also going to ask questions about the previous ones because I think they're very worth talking about. How are you ladies tonight?
Great.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Congratulations. Pub day.
Yeah, this is my pub day, so there's always a bit of exhilaration with all that. So.
Oh, yes. That and when the first box of books comes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it never gets old.
No. Jess, I'm going to start with you. You've got this kinship series. I've read the first two books and loved them. I haven't had a chance to read this one yet, but that's going to be on my list. They're interesting characters. You've got an extremely strong woman there that has been through a lot and is stepping up. And I'm fascinated to hear more about it when you and Anna are talking. But strong women seem to be the core of these things tonight that we're going to be talking about. And Mariana, you have a series that you know I love because I'm into archaeology. Yes. And followed all of that. But this is a real departure for you.
It is. It's the
very
first
different
in a very long time because I was enjoying the Fei Longchamp mystery so much, the archaeology. But I just had this story that needed to be told. So I stepped away from Fei for a while, and I really had a good time with the research and the writing and the new time period. It's been fun.
It's probably healthy to change up every once in a while. Do you feel?
I think so. It keeps the creative juices flowing. You know, it's the same. You know, I also write short stories, and it's really I call it like a palate cleanser. Like when you're having a nice meal and multiple courses, you can step away and do something really different, and it makes everything better. So as an artist, I really enjoyed getting to do this new series.
And the cover, everything is so dramatically different. And Jess, you were or still are perhaps writing for the Dayton Daily News?
I actually wrapped up with them about a year ago.
Okay.
But I'd written for them for 20 years, two different weekly columns. The first one was a humor column, and the second one was called Literary Life, and it was about writers and literary events in the greater Dayton area. And yeah, it was an amazing run, particularly as a freelance columnist. 20 years, I can't believe it. But it was time to wrap up and move on and change things up. And now I'm writing a regular column for Writer's Digest called Leveling Up Your Writing Life. Level Up Your Writing Life.
Okay.
So that's like a dream come true to write for Writer's Digest. So
I bet it is. Yeah. And the words, tell me what that means. Leveling up your writing.
So it's level up your writing life, and life is in parentheses. So the idea is the first half of the column, which is geared towards creative nonfiction and fiction writers, is focused on a specific craft element. So it might be setting, for example. And then the second half, or the last third, depending on the column of the columns, sort of flips it and says, okay, how about you, dear writer? Are you optimizing your setting for writing? You know, what can you do to give yourself a setting that will help you be the most productive and creative? So that's kind of the pattern of each column. And I've done it for about a year and a half now. So it's been great.
Oh, it sounds perfect. I'm sure very helpful to newer authors that are coming along, and even ones that are established, just to maybe spark a different idea.
I hope so. That's the goal.
Okay. And Mariana, what intrigued you so much about doing this new character?
Well, a lot of times the setting is what kind of gets me sparked on a new story. And I went to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, which is fabulous if you ever have a chance to go. It's emotionally grueling, and they really do the sucker punch on you emotionally because they've had Tom Hanks narrate things. So
Oh,
when Tom starts talking, I mean, my neck was wet. I was crying, and it was
Yeah.
just very emotional. But the whole time I'm going, why is this here? Why is this in New Orleans? I don't associate New Orleans with World War II. And so it became clear that the reason it's there is that's where they built the boats used on D-Day, so which was yesterday, was the D-Day. And so those, when you see the newsreels and the photos of the boats that came down and lowered the gates and the soldiers ran off onto the beaches in Normandy, those boats were built in New Orleans, and the man that owned the factories designed them. He was like a mechanical genius. He makes a cameo appearance in the book. But he had 75 employees in the 1930s building boats for people who fished in the bayous. So he had to build boats that could operate in shallow water and beach themselves well. And he saw the war coming before it even started and started marketing the Navy, saying, you need boats like mine. And so early in the war, they gave him contracts. And by the time the war was over, he had 25,000 employees.
oh my goodness.
75. It just exploded. He built airplanes. They built airplanes and boats and small ships, and it was amazing. Had multiple factories, but one of them is the site of the World War II Museum, and so that's why it's New Orleans. Eisenhower called Andrew Higgins, who's the man that did the inventing, the man who won the war. So it really was important. And so I thought, what an interesting setting it was. And then I did some reading, and I found out about a secret project they had at one of their factories that it was mostly women, because the men were away at war. And the women would come home covered with carbon dust, and they called it the carbon division. But they were not told what they were building. And so at the end of the war, he announced it, but I'm not going to spoil the book by telling you. But most of that project remains secret, even to this day. There are things, there's a historian at the World War II Museum who's doing research on those parts. And I've talked to her, but the people took it to their grave because they were told it would be, treason to what they were doing, which left me a lot of latitude. So I've worked really hard to give the facts as I know them, and then write a story that fits into the cracks of the facts that we probably will never know.
I know they took the vow of silence very seriously.
Yeah, because the project was declassified probably in the 70s, but it's not like you got a phone call that says you can talk now. It's just like, and so, but it was declassified. So some people did, that generation is passing from us, and there aren't many of them left, but a few people have told what they knew, which everybody only knew what concerned their work. Know that little bit, but from what they said and what the historian said, I got on the internet and started Googling for carbon and came up with the blueprints for what those parts went into. So in 1944, I would have been shot for looking at them, and the person that showed them to me would have been shot. But now you can dial them up on the internet. So that was a lot of fun. And so it enabled me to describe things that I had not seen described elsewhere.
That's amazing, isn't it? That everything's on the internet. All right.
Primary sources, yeah.
Jess, you started off with The Widows with your character, which had a huge impact on me emotionally. I just thought it was deep and challenging, and no room for fluff. Something happened, she had to meet the need, and she just did it, and went on from there. How did you build that character that way? What inspired you to do that?
Well, I ran across the character inspiration kind of based on setting, really, in a way. Our younger daughter at the time was going to Ohio University, which is in southeastern Ohio, which is the Appalachian part of Ohio. And we wanted to go over and visit her for her birthday and go hiking with her. She was an outdoor education major and played rugby, so very outdoorsy, very fit. So honestly, I was Googling, our friend the internet, for places to hike that would be interesting to her and that wouldn't require an ambulance for me. So,
I can relate.
yeah, and poking around just touristy, websites, I came across the Vinton County website, and it's a very rural county, and they had a little article about Maud Collins. And Maud was the first female sheriff in the state of Ohio in 1925. And so I was immediately struck by, okay, a female sheriff in 1925 in Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those things I would not make up.
I was wondering if you did.
know.
I was reading it, I'm going, surely she's found real life women to read about. That's very cool.
Yeah. So so I kind of went from there. I will say since 1925, the next female sheriff in Ohio was in 1976. And then I think there was another one in 2000, and now we have 2 more. So we've had 5 in our 200 plus year history in 88 counties. But one of the current sheriffs, I read an article recently interviewing her, and she pointed out there's 60 in the whole country right now. So it's still, there are female police officers and female deputy sheriffs and female, police chiefs. So it's not like there aren't women in law enforcement, because there definitely are, and they've made great strides, but still to this day, for the category of sheriff, that's still a really rare job for a female. So I was inspired by thinking about, this woman in 1925, and in real life, her husband is killed in the line of duty, and there's no mystery at all about it. And of course, I turned it into a mystery. And what would that be like to juggle all of that? And I started also thinking about my family's from Appalachia, and so I started thinking about the strong women that I grew up seeing as role models, not using that language when you're 5 in your own head, or you're 10 or you're 12. You don't think, oh, that's a role model, but you can look back later and realize, oh, my Aunt Opal was a real role model, for example. And they were kind of like Lily. They were strong and compassionate, but not a whole lot of room for, like you say, fluff. And so I kind of drew from that.
It was a hard life in those days for everyone, but for women alone, it was even worse.
Yeah, and like I say, my family were all from Appalachia. They were in eastern Kentucky, and so they were tobacco farmers until my parents' generation. And then most of them became factory workers. And, as I was growing up, I would hear, well, at least we weren't coal miners. I had a couple great uncles who were coal miners. And I always thought, well, that's a little snobby to say. But then I looked back and I thought maybe what they were saying was, as hard as it is to make a living as a tobacco farmer or any kind of farmer, or as a factory worker, at least we weren't coal miners, because that's really hard,
Yeah.
So
and dangerous.
Oh, very, yeah. So I did a lot of research, talked to retired coal miners, talked to an uncle who had worked in mines, and read a lot and visited places. Museums are great, like Mariana was saying. Went to several museums and tried to make it as real as I possibly could.
Yeah, you did a good job. It really worked. Mariana, you had the spark to do this woman, and there's a great deal of technical knowledge in the book. At least I have to think it is, because I am not techie at all. How did you do that? And are you that way yourself, or did you do a great deal of research?
Well, I did a great deal of research, and I also put a lot of thought into how to make it accurate, but translate it into everyday language. So you'll see that there was an important thing that I described as having the shape of a rainbow, because people know what that looks like. And so instead of saying parallel curves that, whatever, no, rainbow has fewer syllables than what you might say. And it's just True. So I tried to use everyday language or poetic language to show how beautiful I think the science is. As far as my background, my bachelor's is in physics, engineering physics. And so it's actually, sometimes I think maybe this is a book I lived my whole life to write. And my first job out of graduate school the first time was teaching physics at a community college. So
Okay.
I've had lifelong experiences of communicating scientific work to a lay audience. You know, I worked as an environmental engineer for a number of years, and that was literally the standard to which we were to write our reports were for the intelligent lay person. So, I knew that I wanted the science to be right, but I knew I wanted it to be fun to read, you know, and maybe also inspire the kind of awe I feel at the beauty of it all. And so I thought, well, who's the interesting character? And I just thought, you know, as always with the archaeological books, I sort of followed the same process. If I started with the place and the history of it, and then I thought who would be there. And so I thought, you know, there's not a lot of credit really given to the fact that so much was done by women by the time the war was done, because all of the men were overseas, you know, of the proper age. So most everything was done by women or men that for some reason were not in the military. And so I thought it would be really interesting to have a young woman who knew science, who knew physics, and to give a woman that young a knowledge of physics, I gave her parents who were physicists and who brought her up from infancy, teaching her these things with the presumption that she too would have a PhD and do physics and teach and all the things that they did, but they died before she could go to college. And the war, there's a war on, so what is she going to do? So she's got a Rosie the Riveter type job, where she is, you know, contributing to the war effort. She's able to support herself. She has a lot to be grateful for, but she really wants more. And so this book is about the way that she finds to have more. And I pitched this book originally as Rosie the Riveter meets Bletchley Park. So
That's good.
Problem solving woman, you know. And so I've talked a lot about her without giving her name. Her name is Justine Byrne. And so Justine is, you know, was born to be a physicist, and she doesn't have the piece of paper, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't know her stuff. And that's who she is.
Well, I have to say, I majored in English, but I got my master's in technical communication.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So there's that translation of, and actually one of several first jobs was at a factory writing manuals for factory workers. So I would think to myself, okay, how would my Aunt Betty read this or whatever? And I am just in awe. You really do. I'm going to fangirl for a minute here because I finished reading it this afternoon, and I thought, wow, weaving together in a way that is poetic language and beautiful, the science, but also the history, but also the role of women and their balancing, you know, the strictures of their times. And I don't want to give away too much, but there's a scene where they're like putting on makeup and, you know, putting on a little bit of lipstick and rouge, but they're also talking about, oh, wait, let's, you know, the one Justine is explaining to her friend, you know, a scientific principle that she couldn't possibly know, but it's so natural. I didn't feel like, oh, the author is now stopping the action to tell me. I felt like I'm in this conversation, but I'm, you know, I'm with her friend learning too. And I just thought, wow, that is a juggling act. So bravo, my friend, you did a good job.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah,
you're welcome.
You know, well, and I teach fiction writing at the University of Oklahoma, and I talk to them, you know, about, you know, every scene has to have a reason for being there. So once you finished your draft, you read through, and does this scene need to be there? But really, I'm happier if there are more than one reason for it to be there.
Right.
Because the reader, even that, you know, you're looking at it technically and going, look at what's going on in the scene, but any reader, I think, will just feel that it's tighter and the pacing is better if there's more than one thing happening, and it doesn't feel like an info dump. You know, so.
Right.
Yeah.
No, keeping it interesting and keeping the people turning the pages is equally as important.
Yeah.
Because they can miss out on something if you're beginning to lose them for any reason.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I read a book many years ago, and I don't remember the title or the author, so I don't have to disparage a real person, but I'll just say it was a woman's book about a woman whose marriage fell apart, and she went to the beach and ran away from it all. And I swear every 50 pages, she'd stand there and look at the water for a whole full page. And I learned to skip the page. And I thought, I don't ever want to write that page.
That's funny. I never want to write that page. I like that.
What other things have you found, both, and this is for both of you, that have contributed to your writing career and have brought you to where you are today?
Well, I think the writing life, and I don't know that you know this, or even if somebody tells you, I don't think you can know this at the beginning. But it is about creating the stories and the art and connecting with readers, but it's also so much about the journey and the personal growth and the connections you make along the way. And so just, kind of looking around and realizing, hey, I'm part of this amazing community. I may not be the first chair in the violin section. I may be the person who hits the little triangle every now and then in this community, but I'm part of this great thing. And I think feeling, bolstered in that way really helps.
Yeah. And you have to remember that, you don't see the person reading your book, but there are people out there who are getting pleasure, from something you did. I've come to think a lot about art in general from being a writer, in that it's like, well, what's it for? And I think it's to communicate what it's like to be a human being. And I think it's to communicate the feelings, and that's another thing I tell my students, is that if you take nothing else out of this class, clearly you have to come the rest of the semester, but on day one, I'm going to tell you, make them feel something. That's really the bottom line, is they'll turn those pages if they are engaged and feel something coming from you.
One of the greatest pleasures I've had since I've had the bookstore is getting to know the community feeling that you mentioned. Mystery authors are particularly tight with each other and supportive of each other. It's a great, I love your black cat over your shoulder.
Thank you.
I have one right
here.
I have one of those, and she's always in, if I'm in a picture, she's going to be in it too. That's why the door is closed to the office. She'd be on the keyboard by now. But it's, I've determined that it's probably the most generous community that I've ever known, because they're supportive of each other. They will recommend each other's books when they're signing. If we ask an author, which I will in a bit, what you read for pleasure when you have time, they're always very supportive that way. And I think that's got to be a great feeling to be part of that. And while we're there, what do you read for pleasure if you have time?
Well, you go ahead.
Okay. It's an interesting time for you to ask that, because a couple of weeks ago, I actually had pneumonia, and so was laying around, and it was like, I can read my friends' books. So I read Jess's book. I read Julia Bryan Thomas's book, which is coming out next week, which is also a World War II book. And I read Rilla Askew's book about a historical book from 1400s England. So I was kind of on a historical jag. I guess my friends are on a historical jag. So that was a lot of fun. And but before that, I had been really kind of tired. Even my pleasure reading is related to my work, which is, both good and bad. And I do academic research on the work of Agatha Christie. So I always got her books piled up around, because there's a lot of them. And really a lot of them. And then there's 170 stories and a few dozen plays, and you just scratch the surface and you just never get to the end of what that woman did. It's amazing.
Wow.
She really was, when you think of the time and the era and what circumstances she wrote under in so many cases. Just a fascinating background.
It really was.
Yeah.
What drew you to become an Agatha Christie scholar on top of everything else that you do? I think that's wonderful, but I guess I'm really asking, could you share your time management tips?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Besides getting pneumonia, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no.
Well, things changed. So like, when my children left home, I started having a little more time, and and I'm a little bit of a workaholic, but then my work and fun bleed together so much. And then also I was on the tenure track. And so my mysteries are actually, with my publisher Parrish, and I did get tenure based on the mysteries, but it never hurts to have some more scholarly work to point to because the scholars among us don't always understand what we do. And so I got interested in Witness for the Prosecution, if anybody's familiar with that play, which, is very much asked the question of what is justice? And I've always thought, if there's anything important beyond the importance of pleasure to what we mystery writers do, it's that we investigate justice. What is moral is not always the same thing as what is legal, and neither is always the same thing as what is just. And so I kind of cracked open the Agatha Christie stuff by writing an article about Witness for the Prosecution, and then that's just kind of led to one more project after another.
Wow.
So, and I enjoy it, so I've kept doing it.
That's awesome.
And where was that published?
The witness work is being published. Some of it will be in a chapter I wrote for the Bloomsbury Handbook to Agatha Christie, which I'm actually the co-editor of, the senior editor. Will be coming out in September. And so as a result of a presentation I did on Witness for the Prosecution, Bloomsbury asked me to edit the volume, and that gave me the chance to write. So I wrote 2 chapters. I wrote one on justice and one on feminism in Agatha Christie. And then I wrote another article that was in a scholarly journal that was about a play that was never performed during her lifetime. I got the chance, I got a grant and was able to visit the private archives at her grandson's house.
Oh.
And the archive, so I was looking at Witness for the Prosecution, and I got done with what I needed to do. And he kind of sidles up and he says, "You want to look at this?" And I go, "Yeah."
Yeah.
Script with 1932 on the cover. And so I wrote, was the first person to write at length about that play because he was so generous. People are, if you share their interests, people are very, very generous with their time.
They are. That's amazing. I love that. Yeah. So I have recently read Deer Season by Erin Flanagan. She won that novel won the Edgar for the best debut mystery this year. And it's really great. I read it actually as an ARC and was honored to provide a blurb for it. And she happens to be one of my best friends. But it's a wonderful book. And obviously I'm not the only person who thinks so, because she won the Edgar. So I'm really proud of her. So I have to shout out that book every chance I get. I do read a lot of mysteries. I'll read anything by Laura Lippman. I mean, if she wrote a grocery list and published it on a blog, I'd read her grocery list. Just, she's such a brilliant writer. She has a collection of essays out that I have, but haven't read just yet, that I'm looking forward to. I've read a couple of her essays in, I think it's called Long Form Magazine. It was really good. And another book that I recommend is a collection of short stories and a novella. And I believe the author is Danielle Evans. It's not they aren't mysteries, but it's called the Office of Historical Corrections. The Office of Historical Corrections. And so the premise is for that novella in this collection is that there is literally an office where people have, a bureaucracy where their job is to go to places that have plaques or whatever, and, you know, investigate if there've been any complaints about, that's not true, that didn't happen in 1861, it happened in 1863 or whatever. And you can see how it's comedic, you know, that it starts kind of on the surface of, oh, this is kind of a funny premise, but it gets deep very quickly. And I just loved, it was just such a brilliant concept, and she executed it so well. So I always recommend that book as well.
Wonderful. It's always good to hear about other things to read. So I have to ask you the usual question, two usual questions. First, your covers. Did you have anything to say about them? Did you help design them?
I'll hold them up.
Yep.
Oh, I love my cover. I was really, you know, I'm not an artist, so I don't ever go to them and say it has to have, you know, look like this. But I will give them some design, some things that would be nice to be on there, you know. And so they really got the Rosie the Riveter look, you know.
Yes.
And they've got, this isn't actually what the factory looks like that I described, but it's good enough. It says factory, and at the very end, they've got piles of boxes. And I don't know if the artist read in the book all the way to the end to see that the boxes are important, or if I just got lucky. But it's got the boxes and everything. And then this was interesting to me because I don't know about design, but they told me that the little bitty airplanes up here were intended to signify World War II. And I go, really? But then I put my hand over the airplanes, and it really doesn't look like World War II anymore. So it's like code for our brains. So yeah, so that
it helps to place it very much.
It really does.
Yeah, that and her the way she's got the turban tied around her head. That was so common to keep their hair out of the way.
Yeah.
How about you, Jess?
Beautiful. So mine doesn't have planes, but it's got birds. So maybe that's code to signify we're in a rural territory. I love my covers. You know, sometimes, you know, we hear people complain about their covers. I've been thrilled with all of them. I haven't had any suggestions to give them on any of them, except the first one I did, the original cover to The Widows, which is the first book in the series. The Lily looked like an 1880s school marm. I'm like, I know she's in Appalachia, and it's a, you know, rural area, and you don't want her in a flapper dress. So I was glad they didn't go that far the other way, but somewhere in between, you know. So they took the suggestion to heart. I sent a couple of photos from, you know, just everyday women's clothes, advertisements from, you know, like the Sears catalog or whatever, to send along to them as an example of, no, this is actually what a woman would have worn, you know, in that area at that time. And they changed the dress, and then they've, you know, kept up with the fashion ever since. So I think they did a great job, and they're beautiful and evocative. And so.
Yeah. And they create an atmosphere. It tells you, both of your books tell you what era you're going into and what to expect, and that feeling
of a feeling of kind of, you know, the setting and the story. And I think they do a great job. I'm not a designer at all either. I mean, I know when I like something, but that's not the same as being a designer. So
right.
Yeah, the only time I've really barked much was when the covers, and this has been a number of years, just weren't true based on what was in the book. And it would have been a bait and switch. And so, and they weren't, you know, they worked with me, and they got it to where we were all happy. So
that's good. And so what's next for each of you?
Well, my next book is due June 30th. So it's like,
say that again.
Yeah, the next one is due June 30th. So I am 85,000 words into the next Justine book. So it's going to be a series. I'm taking her to Washington, D.C. to work with the code crackers.
Nice.
That were mostly women also for the same reason. And I can't tell you too much because it'll spoil this one, but most of the people who or not, who survived this book, the Physicist's Daughter, go with her to Washington. And it's just as the Battle of the Bulge is starting, and there's a traitor in a room where the most important code crackers work, and they can't put messages through there until they find out who the traitor is. So the clock ticking of this huge battle going on in Europe, and she's there, and and it's called The Traitor beside her.
Okay. Wonderful.
Let's see, I'm working on, I can't say a ton either. I'm working on a standalone, but it is still historical, and it is suspense, and it's, nature is a part of it. So I'm just sort of playing with that idea and seeing where it takes me.
Okay, but we have something to look forward to from both of you.
Yes.
Yes.
We're not getting any questions from the audience.
One come up while I was talking about the women from Dayton who were involved in code cracking. I read about them. There were some women that were taken to Dayton and not told what they were working on, but what they were working on were the machines to crack the code, particularly the Enigma code for Germany. So they were actually doing the stuff a lot like what Justine is doing in this book, where they were building strange looking gadgets that they didn't know what they were. But some of them figured some things out, like they figured out that the gadgets had 26 positions, and like, well, 26 is the alphabet. So they were smart women, and they figured some of it out. But that's what they did in Dayton. At least that's what I know they did in Dayton. There may be more.
Well, come to Dayton and we'll figure it out together.
Yeah, that would be, we should write that together. That'd be fun.
That'd be fun. That would be fun. It looks like somebody's asking about if we're going to meet your other characters eventually. Are you going to have a time jump?
What's that?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Will be a time to. Oh, Faye and Joe. I guess that I have not set them. They're not on ice forever. There's only one of me, so I can't write to. I want to pursue Justine for a while, but Faye and Joe. There doesn't have to be a time jump. I can go right back to where we left them. In the early years, I aged Faye in real time, so she was about a year older for each book, and then I decided she was getting too old, so I. Slowed it down, and there would be more like 3 months between books or something, which is what Sue Grafton did with Kinsey Milholland. I think there were 2 months between books. And so Faye is currently in her early 40s. And so I see no reason when I go back to Faye that she doesn't have to be any older. It's just that I have to then kind of divorce them from what's going on in the real world, because some of the earlier books one of the books took place during the Deepwater Horizons oil spill. And I didn't realize when I was doing that I forever now have to date anything in the real world against that. And so I had to establish, I know now that Faye was born on December 2nd, 1969, and I have to establish against those benchmarks that are always true. But no, so I figured Faye is raising her children, running her business, hanging out with Joe. I've given her a break from dead bodies, but I can go back at any time and throw one in her path.
That's right. That's
okay.
right.
Someone else says to Jess and Mariana, the two of you are great together in an interview. We'll definitely buy your books. And would you ever want to live a day in the life of one of your characters?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
It is.
Yeah, it is. Sure, but just one day.
Yeah. I love history, but I am well aware of the difficulties of any historical period before this one, and I like plumbing, I like penicillin, all those things. But yeah, one day, even a month, I would
Sure.
really do, but
a month. I still can tomatoes and green beans each summer. And when I do that, I'll think, oh, this is so hard. This is such labor, but it tastes so great. I love home canned tomatoes and home canned green beans. And then every time I stop and think, so you bought the green beans and tomatoes at the farmer's market. You're using an electric stove and a pressure canner, and you have air conditioning going, and you can take a break and go watch TV. Think about your great grandmother who also did this canning, with a wood-fired stove, no air conditioning, 9 children underfoot.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when I think about going back in time, particularly to that area, I think, yeah, maybe for a couple days.
Yeah, because the thing about your grandmother, if she didn't do it, they didn't eat.
That is absolutely true.
I love to garden. I love to can. I just dabble. I know I'm just a dabble, and I just don't think I'm good enough at any of them to survive. So hats off to them, really. Because
we have one more another question here. Will you talk more about process? What's a normal writing day for you?
Oh,
is there one?
Is there one? Well, I will say that in the early years when I did still have children at home, my writing was when I had a chance, and so that when they were finally all in school, I would drop everybody off, come home, pour myself a Coca-Cola, get in the recliner with the laptop in my lap, and was ready to go. And the stories had been piling up since the last time that I had time. And so I believe in the psychological principle of the conditioned response. And I think that just doing it and just doing it again and just doing it when you don't feel like it really helps you get in the psychological place to do creative work.
Yeah. And now that the children are gone, do you have a pattern?
It's still pretty much whenever I have time, because I do have a day job. I have to teach and prepare my classes and I have to grade the papers, and so but I have more control over my time, and so I know when my classes are going to be, and I organize the flexible things around them to open up as much time as I can for the books. And so, and then it's still that same feeling of, okay, now I have time. What about you, Jess?
I try to schedule my time. I try to exercise first.
Good for you.
Yeah, I did not do that until recently. I always felt like you have to do the writing first, but then I realized I would never exercise if I didn't exercise first. And what I find is either walking or swimming that my mind kind of loosens, and the characters start talking to me. The problem from yesterday gets, oh, here's an idea to solve it. And then, so after that, that's when I try to get in a couple hours of what I call deep work. And it can be writing, it can be brainstorming, it just depends on the stage of the project that I'm in. And then I'll take a lunch break and maybe do another hour or two. And then after that, it's the business end of things. Basically the business end of things, which is pretty much everything else. If it's updating your website or answering email or whatever, I save that for later in the afternoon.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't do very well with creative work in the evenings.
Yeah,
it's gone at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You can answer emails and do social media and stuff like that. And so I do arrange my time as to my energy level too. But I need to start exercising first because, you're right.
It adds more stimulation to the brain, I think.
I think so.
I say that, but I don't do it. So it's easy to say.
Yeah.
This has been great, ladies. Is there anything else you'd like to add to what you've said? You think you did it?
I think so.
I think it was a great session. We'll hold up the books one more time. These books are at Book Carnival. All of the books we have, obviously Mariana's from the past. We have all of Jess's books. So they're available. Do come in and support these authors. And we'll have you back the next time, hopefully in person.
That would be lovely.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be. Thank you.
It just means so much more, and I'd love to have both of you back, hopefully the next book. And if that doesn't work, we'll figure out when. Okay?
Okay. Thank you for having us.
So good to
Oh,
see
it was wonderful. Thank you so much. We all enjoyed it. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Check us out on the YouTube when you have a chance. Book Carnival YouTube, and everything will be up there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh yeah, it works well. Good rest of the day, ladies. Bye.
Bye-bye.